With the NFL draft over and dynasty value shaken up all over the place, it's time to run through our dynasty rankings once again, starting with the top 40 overall quarterbacks. So at the top, in tier 1, no surprises and nothing really much to talk about. It's Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. All of these guys are absolutely elite. There should be no arguments about Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson as MVP caliber players every single year. Jalen Hurts has been incredible for fantasy for 3+ years now, and even if the tush push gets banned this month, that doesn't change my view of Hurts for fantasy at all. The only projection really in this tier is just Jayden Daniels continuing what he did last year, but given his pedigree, the arm talent, and especially the rushing ability, in year 2 in the NFL, year 2 in the Kingsbury offense, offensive stability with McLaurin, Ertz, B-Rob, and Eckler, and the addition of Deebo Samuel just makes it feel very easy to predict that Daniels will continue producing as a top 5 quarterback in 2025 and well beyond. Plus, he's 2 to 4 years younger than everybody else in this tier and is the second youngest in my entire top 10, so you love to see that for Dynasty too. The only thing that you could argue for tier 1 is should we add in Joe Burrow, who is my only player in tier 2 because he is so much better than everyone else behind him, but I cannot put him in tier 1 for the simple fact that he doesn't run, and that's completely fine for NFL football, and I don't believe that he's in any way less valuable to his team than Allen, Lamar, Hurts, or Daniels. In fact, he's probably more valuable than a couple of those guys for NFL purposes, but this is fantasy football, and without that rushing floor and ceiling, he is 100% reliant upon massive passing production, which to his credit, he is very capable of and did it last year and has the weapons to do it again in 2025. But even last year, in a season where he nearly threw for 5,000 yards and 43 touchdowns, he still finished as the QB3 in points per game behind Josh Allen and Lamar and only 1 point per game better than Jalen Hurts and Jayden Daniels. If we just remove 100 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns, taking his stat line to 4,800 yards and 40 touchdowns, which is still insane, he drops by 0.8 points per game, pretty much down to that Daniels and Hurts level. And again, that's with a 4,840 season. If we remove 300 more yards, 5 more touchdowns, so now he's at 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns. He is now under 20 points per game as the QB7 in fantasy, right next to Jared Goff last year. That is how slippery of a slide Burrow is on because he doesn't run, and that's why I can't have him in tier 1, but he's still a tier of his own in tier 2 as a top 5 dynasty quarterback. Now, as we get into tier 3, it is really weird for me to say that we've already hit a drop-off, not so much in terms of NFL talent, but in overall confidence rate as your weekly fantasy quarterback 1. Because I don't know if there is as much of a difference between my QB6 and my QB20, honestly. Everyone is very similar, and the only true differentiations that I have in these next couple of tiers is my completely subjective confidence rate for future production. So in tier 3, I have just 3 guys. It is Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Caleb Williams. Mahomes and Herbert, I think, are very similar discussions. We know that both are tremendous talents at the position in the league right now, but it seems like their offenses are trying to rein them in a bit and not so reliant on them to win games. And it has worked for Kansas City 3 years in a row now. What you're hoping for with both of these players is a return to high volume passing production, because then that's when the fantasy numbers are going to follow. I mean, we saw how good Justin Herbert was over the second half of last year when they finally let him throw. Now they've added Trey Harris and a couple of tight ends to the mix while also massively upgrading their running back spot too. So maybe the Chargers don't want Herbert to throw 550 plus times, which is very unfortunate, but we've seen him compete with Joe Burrow for passing numbers with seasons of 4,700 plus yards, 30 plus touchdowns. It's just been a couple of years, and we are very patiently waiting, or impatiently waiting, for Justin Herbert's production to return to elite goodness. The same goes with Patrick Mahomes, who was literally a lock for like 4,800 yards and 40 touchdowns pretty much every single year from 2018 through 2022, but it's been 2 years of low production that is entirely possible to continue, but there is hope. With the additions of Xavier Worthy last year, we get a full season of Hollywood Brown, plus Rashee Rice returning, and a very minimal investment into anyone in their backfield. We could see Mahomes get back to throwing the ball 600 plus times again, throwing it down the field again, which could vault his numbers back into those top 5 ranges that we knew a couple years ago. The one guy in this tier who really deserves the conversation is Caleb Williams, but after everything that the Bears have done this season, there is literally no excuse, and I am fully bought in. Ben Johnson's offensive system with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, Colson Loveland, DeAndre Swift out of the backfield with a massively upgraded offensive line is absolutely filthy. We can talk all day long about how all of these receivers and how the tight ends are all going to get enough to make them good for fantasy, but they are all good for Caleb Williams. Even last year, after Shane Waldron was fired, Williams was on pace for 3,700 yards and 23 touchdowns, which doesn't sound great, but that's the base from where he can go from in 2025 with all of the upgrades around him. Not to mention that he also paced for over 500 rushing yards over the second half of last year. Last year, Bo Nix threw for 3,700 yards, 29 touchdowns, plus had 404 on the ground. So Caleb wasn't doing all that much worse than Bo Nix once Shane Waldron was gone. If Caleb Williams actually hits in 2025, he's going to be above Justin Herbert, maybe even above Patrick Mahomes, depending on the Chiefs' offense, possibly even getting into tier 2 with Joe Burrow. This might honestly be the last offseason in a very long while where Caleb Williams is valued outside of the top 5 or isn't viewed as a more elite option at the quarterback position. So if you do believe in him, now is the time to buy. Now, tier 4, tier 4 is literally 8 players deep. It is pretty much all of these young or young-ish kind of players that all have very easy arguments for why they should be top 10 or top 12 guys in Dynasty, but they also have fairly easy arguments for why they should be outside the top 12. So in order for me in this tier goes Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Drake Maye, Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, and CJ Stroud. Now, Kyler is at the top because I want to give him one more year to get back to what he was doing before he got hurt in 2023, which was a perennial top 10 fantasy quarterback with good passing stats and elite rushing ability. Everything is there for him to return to form with Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride. They got a good run game and pass catching back with James Conner. This should be a good offense, and Kyler Murray should be a good fantasy quarterback. I understand if you just want to be done with Kyler, but I personally, I'm giving him one more year at this value. Baker Mayfield is up next, and even though he is the oldest quarterback in this entire tier, being 30 years old doesn't bother me at all. Had you sold off of Kirk Cousins at this age, you would have missed on 4 seasons of 4,200 plus yards and 30 plus touchdowns with the Minnesota Vikings, and it could have been 5 seasons of that production had he not torn his ACL, because he was on pace for 4,600 yards and 36 touchdowns in 2023 at 35 years old. I'm just not concerned about anything really with Baker unless he himself gets hurt, but I'm not trying to predict injuries here. I just want a guy who's been a back-to-back QB1, who has Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, now Emeka Egbuka, Bucky Irving, Cade Otton, easy top 10 dynasty quarterback. Now up next is Drake Maye, who is the second youngest quarterback in this tier. I can already hear the Bo Nix fans typing in the comments upset about why Nix is behind him, but this is projecting forward and also staying true to my rookie evals of these guys from last year. Not to mention that I would argue that Drake Maye's situation might be better than Bo Nix's now after all of the upgrades that Drake Maye got in the offseason. He gets 2 good wide receivers in Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams in the draft. Huge improvements on offensive line, headlined, of course, by Will Campbell at 4th overall in the NFL draft. They also draft TreVeyon Henderson as an explosive weapon out of the backfield, and the offensive system should be a lot better now under Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels. Maye's season last year was the absolute floor, which was QB 16 in points per game from weeks 6 through 17 as the actual starter in the worst situation imaginable. Give him all of those upgrades and the fact that he is, again, the second youngest quarterback in this tier, 3rd youngest in my entire top 32, and his future is very, very bright as an annual top 12 dynasty quarterback. Then we have Bo Nix, the second most productive rookie from last year's class as the QB9 in total points and the QB10 in points per game last year, so I am technically ranking him below his own production so far, but I do think that's okay because he is in the same tier as my QB9, so I have no issues if you prefer Bo Nix over anybody else in this tier. I just do wish that Denver did a little bit more offensively to boost Nix's possible production in 2026. I mean, they did add Evan Ingram, which is great. They have a 2nd round RJ Harvey, should help the run game, but outside of that, I'm not really inspired by the Pat Bryant pick. They added Trent Sherfield in free agency, and then everything else they did this offseason was all defensive focused, signing 2 big names in free agency, both from the 49ers, drafting a corner in round 1, 2 edge rushers in the top 150. So the offense is pretty much status quo outside of the addition of RJ Harvey and Evan Ingram, which are very good ads. I don't want to dismiss them, but just not splashy ads which is probably honestly fine. Their offensive line, of course, is still one of the best in the league. Nix himself is entering year 2 in the NFL, year 2 in the Sean Payton offense. He still has good weapons in general. It's all there for him to pretty much repeat his 2024, but I just don't think that there is a super high ceiling that he can be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, whereas everybody else above him, I do see that ceiling. Actually, someone very similar to Bo Nix and a guy who outproduced him on a points per game basis last year from weeks 1 through 17, and at the same age too, is probably my favorite buy in all of Dynasty, which is Brock Purdy. If you want a bigger breakdown on why I love Purdy, check out this video right up here, or I'm going to link it at the end as well. But the TLDR is that he was QB 8 in points per game in 2023 and QB 10 in points per game in 2024 in a much different and worse situation than 2023, with no Christian McCaffrey, no Brandon Ayuk, really no Deebo Samuel, really no Ricky Pearsall until the final 2 weeks of the year. So he was the QB 10 in points per game last year with Juwan Jennings and George Kittle. Now in 2025, he gets Christian McCaffrey back, he gets Brandon Ayuk back, he gets a full offseason with Ricky Pearsall, hopefully also not getting shot. Juwan Jennings, George Kittle are still there, and their defense got absolutely gutted this offseason. So if their defense sucks and they allow a bunch of points every single week, then Brock Purdy is going to have to throw more to keep up, thus giving us more fantasy points. I think that he is vastly underrated for Dynasty, and I would be trying hard to tear down from anybody that I have in this tier 4 to Brock Purdy and get something a little bit on top. Now, Jordan Love is next at QB 14, and really there isn't much more to say about Jordan Love. He's in a good offense. He's got a great offensive system. They did add Matthew Golden in round 1, which I am not the biggest fan of Golden himself, but he should be good for Jordan Love. And if I am wrong on Matthew Golden, could be even better for Jordan Love, assuming that he actually hits. He was a QB 6 in points per game in 2023. He was a QB 19 in 2024, but played through a ton of injuries. Josh Jacobs was scoring twice a game. So if we see Jordan Love healthier this year like he was in 2023, plus the touchdowns moving back into the passing game's favor, Love should be a high-end QB2 with QB1 upside. Then we get to Trevor Lawrence, who I very much wanted to put ahead of Jordan Love and maybe even ahead of Brock Purdy, but I think that would have fed just a little bit too much into the hype, and I'm trying to rein myself back in based on more of what I've seen from just Lawrence's whole career. He was a QB 12 in 2022, QB 17 in 2023, and then was absolutely awful last year before missing the second half of the season. It's not that he hasn't had weapons throughout his career. ETN was great in 2022 and 2023. Christian Kirk was a 1,000-yard receiver in 22. Ridley was a 1,000-yard receiver in 23. Evan Ingram was great both years. BTJ last year, and even with all of that, he's at best been a high-end QB2 for fantasy. Now, obviously, I love everything that Trevor Lawrence has going for him this year. The addition of Liam Cohen's offense that gave Baker Mayfield his best season of his career last year might be the biggest piece to this entire puzzle. You got Brian Thomas Jr. in year 2, Travis Hunter taken second overall, Bayshaw Tootin is a great 4th-round pick, and they still have Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, and Brenton Strange at tight end. I love all of that for Trevor Lawrence, but I also need to see it first before I put him back into the QB1 conversation for Dynasty. I do love buying him and calling that shot that he can get back there, and I'm going to be very quick to do so if he is producing well in season, but right now, in May, I don't want to give him too much hype that he can't live up to and then has another disappointing season, so he's down in here as a top 15 quarterback with very much room to grow. And then at the end of this tier is CJ Stroud, who I know is actually still the QB 10 on keep trade cut post NFL draft, but I just cannot get on board with still keeping him as a dynasty QB1, let alone a top 10 guy. I get that his rookie season was very good, but he was the QB 10 in points per game in 2023. So he is still valued at his production peak from what we've seen in 2 years of his career. And I'm sure if we fast forward 10 years from now that his rookie season is not going to be the best season of his career, but to act like 2024 didn't happen either seems really strange to me. He averaged 13.7 points per game last year. That is worse than Tua, Geno, Russell Wilson, Anthony Richardson, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, and Daniel Jones, and is 0.6 points per game better than Mason Rudolph. He killed you last year if you were starting him every single week. So to value him as a quarterback 10 now is crazy to me, especially after this entire offseason where they shipped off Laramie Tunzel, their only lineman who ever did anything for the past year or two. They're trying to replace Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs with 2 rookies and Christian Kirk, which may work out for them. I do like both rookies, but only if CJ Stroud also has time to throw and only if those rookies are actually good and translate to the NFL. They replaced their offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick with Nick Caley, who I hope is a better offense, but Slowick was a Shanahan guy. Caley is a Sean McVay guy and was the passing game coordinator for the Rams last year in what is effectively Stafford's second worst season of the past decade in terms of yards per attempt, and touchdowns. So only the most important things for a quarterback at the position. I want to believe that we can get back to how things were in 2023 for CJ Stroud, but I'm having a really hard time thinking that they're going to turn around anytime soon, especially when he doesn't run either, which would at least add some silver lining to his fantasy value if he added a few extra points per game from rushing, but he doesn't even do that, so we can't fall back on that like we can with Drake Maye or Bo Nix or even Trevor Lawrence. And with how many other really good quarterbacks there are in the league right now that I already have ahead of him, plus another handful that I have behind him that can easily surpass him this year, I just don't know how anyone can still value CJ Stroud as a top 12 or even top 15 guy right now. He's actually closer to being outside the top 20 for me than he is inside the top 12. So then to shift us to three guys who actually could surpass CJ Stroud this year, we get to the three names in tier 5 who are all essentially rookies this year, even though technically only one of them is. So it's JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Cam Ward. I do think all three of these guys are really good quarterbacks, and at least for McCarthy and Michael Penix are in really great situations as well. I actually believe that Cam Ward is the most talented quarterback of this tier, but his situation is certainly nowhere near Penix's, let alone McCarthy's, so that does boost them over Cam Ward. But if you told me that by this time next year, all three of these guys are borderline top 12 who are actually top 12 dynasty quarterbacks, I would not be surprised at all. We just need to really see them play, and if they pan out, then fantastic for anybody that bought low on them. Tier 6 is another simple tier of just two quarterbacks in Dak Prescott and Jared Goff, two veterans who have shown the capability to score like top 8 fantasy quarterbacks in recent years. Goff was a QB7 last year, Dak was a quarterback 5 in 2023. I mean, there really isn't anything more that needs to be said. I have no real worries about Jared Goff without Ben Johnson because I trust Dan Campbell. I trust all the weapons that Goff has at his disposal. I'm sure he's probably not going to be QB7 again, but top 15 is very easy. Top 12 is still very likely. Now, I do wish that the Cowboys had invested more into their offense to help Dak Prescott, but when you're throwing to CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, plus if Jaden Blue is their new dynamic pass catcher out of the backfield, there are worse situations to be in for a quarterback. And we've seen Dak be a fantasy QB1 pretty much every single season that he's been healthy. Now, tier 7 is three more young guys who have the upside to get into tier 4 or even higher, but just haven't put it together yet consistently. Maybe not even entirely to their fault. Bryce Young, Jaxson Dart, and Justin Fields. Now, I do think Bryce Young is teed up for the best season of his career so far in year 3. Do not underestimate the effect that Ted McMillan can have for Bryce Young for fantasy football. Plus, we have year 2 in the Dave Canales offense. We have a bunch of consistency everywhere around him after the addition of Ted McMillan. This is another player that I don't want to overhype because we need to see it for more than just a 6-week stretch in 2024, but it is also great to know that he has top 12 upside, as shown by his QB 12 performance from weeks 12 through 17 last year. But he did still have 4 games under 17 points during that stretch, 2 of which were actually under 14 actually. So he is still very much a streaming option rather than an every week starter, but with the upside to actually be an every week starter and to climb into the top 15 this time next year. Jaxson Dart is the easy one of this group because he is the rookie. He'll have a leash in New York to have 2 to 3 seasons to show them what he can do. I actually believe that he will be the starter by the end of October, maybe even sooner, because I don't think they're going to be winning any games with Russell Wilson, and the New York media and the New York fan base is going to be calling for Jaxson Dart to play or Brian Dable to get fired, or both, honestly. But throwing to Malik Neighbors and his rushing upside too, a la Bo Nix, he could be a sneaky riser heading into 2026 if he outproduces expectations this year. Again, a la Bo Nix. And then Justin Fields is, well, Justin Fields. I mean, we all know the story. He's great for fantasy when he plays, but how many games is he going to play? I actually don't think that he finishes his 2-year deal with the Jets as the starter for all 34 games. So his shelf life is very short to prove himself to the Jets or to prove himself to whatever team might want to try him out next time. He is definitely a sell for me if you can get a first, but if not, just keep him while he produces and either use him for that production or try to sell him in season when he is scoring points. Tier 8 now is just all of the QB3s then. None of them really which I think have the upside to climb out of this tier other than the first guy. It's Anthony Richardson, Tua Tagovailoa, Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford, Sam Darnold, Derek Carr, and Tyler Shough. At this point in pretty much everyone's careers, we know who they are, and I don't think any amount of good to even great production is going to really lift them out of this tier, especially for those old guys. Like I said, Anthony Richardson is really the one that I can see being ranked higher next year because he's still just dripping with upside. The rushing ability, as we all know, is phenomenal. He just needs to be able to throw, and maybe he made improvements with the mechanics coach that he hired this offseason, the same one who helped Josh Allen before his breakout year. Maybe the addition of Tyler Warren will give him a friendly target to find in that short to intermediate area that he doesn't need to chuck it 70 yards downfield all the time. Maybe he can actually stay healthy and play more than 4 games a year. That's honestly really the key for Anthony Richardson, is just playing time and experience. If those things happen in 2025, I could see him in that fringe top 20 area because people will still wonder if he's just a fluke or just a one-year wonder. He would need multiple years of production to get back into that top 15 or even higher, which could honestly happen. I'm not fully bet against it, but he's very much behind the 8 ball right now. I guess Tyler Shough could climb out of this tier theoretically, but I also just think that Shough is a bad quarterback, and I do not want Kenny Pickett 2.0. Plus, he's going to be 26 in September. It is crazy that he's actually closer in age to Tua and Sam Darnold, who have been in the league for years, than he is Anthony Richardson. If you drafted him late in round 2 or even in round 3 of Superflex drafts, then fine, but I just don't see any production upside or value upside with Tyler Shough at all. Matter of fact, the only reason that Shough is ahead of anybody in tier 9 is simply because of draft capital and the fact that he's probably going to start for the Saints this year. But if any of Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, or even Will Howard play anywhere close to the same amount of games as Tyler Shough this year, I would much rather have any of those guys. These are the players that I actually think could be where Bryce Young is or higher by this time next year if the ball bounces the right way for them. I would much rather have any of these guys than Tyler Shough if you're swinging for that long-term upside, which you honestly should be. Once you get to this part of Dynasty rankings, you should be looking for the guys that can gain a massive amount of value in a very short amount of time. And it's these 3 that I think could be massively valued this time next year. And then tier 10, to just round out the top 40 overall, is just all the veterans who will probably start games this year but have pretty much zero relevance after that. It's Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, Mason Rudolph, and Joe Flacco. That's it. Nothing really more to say for tier 10. So there we have it, my current top 40 Dynasty quarterback rankings as we head into the summer post-NFL draft. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button for Dynasty content year-round on this channel. Let me know down in the comments whether you agree or disagree on any of these rankings, but we will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.